It is almost Valentine's Day, and that means it is time to stitch up some projects for the ones that we love. Take those heart blocks and turn them into reversible bags. If gift cards are more your thing, how about a fabric envelope, great to sew from scraps, with a cute little heart snap? It is the perfect size for gift cards. Want to make a gift for people on the go? How about a tic-tac-toe bag with French seams? You can put candy in there, but make sure you put something in there that they can't eat so that they can play the game for more than a half hour. Another fun idea, fortune cookies. This is a great way to use up your scraps. You can put notes, you can put money in there as a fortune, all kinds of ideas. That's just a sample of the 8 full tutorials that you're going to find in this video. So you won't have to search around for different things. Just you can look at the timestamps in the description below the video to get to each of these different projects. And they're all in one place, so it's super convenient for you. Who's feeling lucky? Would you love to get rid of your fabric scraps and make these super cute fabric fortune cookies? Because I'm going to show you how easy they are to do, and I'm going to show you 4 different methods depending on exactly how long you want to spend on this and what materials you have in your stash that you want out and doing something fun. So when I showed this to my husband, he said, "But why are you making fortune cookies out of fabric? You can't eat that." And I said, number 1, because I can. Number 2, because I want to. And there's no more reasons needed than that, right? And they're eco-friendly. This is what I tell them. They fold really flat. You can save them, use them next year. The people can use them next year. They could be really cute for place cards too. Say you're having a Chinese New Year party or a Valentine's Day dinner. You could make a longer fortune and have the people's names sticking out. Put that on the plate. How cute would that be? Okay, enough of my ideas. Let's get into it. Now, let's quickly go over materials. You can make these little fortune cookies with lots of scraps of materials that you have at home. And that's why I'm going to show you a few different methods. Some are a little bit easier than others. Some, it just depends what you have in your stash and what you want to use and get rid of. So you're going to need 5-inch squares of fabric or felt or combination for the smaller ones. For the bigger one that I use for money, 6.5-inch. Then you're going to need some way to draw a circle. I use this bowl, which happens to be just under 5 inches. So I'll show you how I'm going to use that on these pre-cuts. I'm also going to be using my circle ruler by Lori Holt for the 6-inch. But again, just grab what you have. If you have a bowl that's a little more than 6 inches, make your squares a little bit bigger. You just want your fabric to be slightly bigger than whatever you're going to be tracing. Then to give them stability, you can use fabric and felt, or you can use 2 kinds of fabric. But then to give it that stability, you're going to need to use something. So I tested a couple things. This one has a Pellon interfacing, and I used the Shapeflex SF191. And I really like that because it gives it the stability, and it's super thin too. So it turns really nicely, gives you that nice shape. But if you don't have that kind of material sitting around, grab some fusible fleece. Most people have that. We're going to work with what you have. I definitely recommend pinking shears, a heat erasable pen. You could use a regular pen. I just always have these, so I use that. Seam ripper of your choice, a ruler, rotary cutter, some pins. And because these projects are small, I'm going to be using my Cricut Easy Press Mini instead of a big iron. I find it easier to see what I'm doing, and I'll show you this when we get to that step. And you know what? Let's let vanity set in, and I'm going to admit I don't melt my nail polish as much with this as I do with my big iron when I'm working on small projects. So let's get started. The first one we're going to do is going to be the simplest. We are going to take 1 piece of fabric and 1 piece of felt, the wrong side of the fabric onto the felt, because there's really not a wrong side to felt. And we are going to trace a circle. A lot of people tell you to cut circles and sew them together. And I'm like, do we really need that step? Because after you sew them, you're going to have to cut again with the pinking shears. So I decided, let's use our time wisely. Let's sew and only cut once. Instead of cutting 2 circles, sewing them, and then trimming the edges, we're just going to sew and trim the edges. So for this one, the outside of the fortune cookie is going to be a zigzag cut. This is your fastest one. You're basically going to sew around it, trim, sew a little stitch line, and you're done. Our next set is going to be made with the same materials, one pre-cut or 5-inch square, and a piece of felt. But this time I'm going to put the fabric right side down on the felt, and we're going to trace that again. This one is different because we are going to sew and then we are going to flip it, press it, and top stitch so that the fortune cookie has a smooth edge like actual fortune cookies do. This one is basically the same materials as this, but we have turned the fabric this way. We're going to sew a 1/4 inch inside that circle. Our next two are basically the same. We're just going to have different innards, different material to stiffen it and give it the shape that it needs. So this set, we're going to put right sides together. This one's a pre-cut. This is just cut from a scrap. That's why that has straight edges. And I've already ironed on the Shape Flex from Pellon, which is a pretty lightweight interfacing. Again, I'm going to take my bowl and I'm going to draw that circle. And then I'm going to put 2 little pins in there. You could do 2 or 3. I find 2 works fine. And we're going to sew with about a 1/4 inch to the inside of that line. This one, again, a scrap pre-cut and a scrap piece of fabric, right sides together. This one has fusible fleece on the back, and I'm going to have this side up just because this is bigger and I want to make sure my bowl stays on that pre-cut. And again, we're going to sew on the inside of that. When you're sewing curves and circles, and especially smaller ones, you want to use a pretty small stitch size so that you get a nice curve when you turn it right side out. What helps with a good smooth curve is not only how well you clip that fabric to bend so that it can form that curve, but also how many little spots there are on the curve that are sewn. So I usually sew something like this with a 1.9 or a 2.0 stitch. So this one is the big one. And just like with the others, I put the right side of the fabric down on felt and drew my circle. Now, because I cut this a little bit bigger, and you can do this with these smaller ones too, but because my scraps were a bit bigger than the circle, and I have at least a 1/4 inch all the way around, this one I'm going to sew right on the line and then trim. So whether you sew on the line or inside the line just depends on how big your fabric is and how big your bowl is. Like had I found a little bit smaller bowl for the pre-cuts, I could have done that as well. So like I said, this is a use what you have and make it work kind of a project. Now it is time to use our pinking shears. We are just going to trim all the way around our circles, all of them. And this is instead of clipping to get these curves. Just make sure that you do not clip your stitching. And you also want to leave maybe 2 inches not trimmed close. So see how I did that? It's close here, and then this one is a little bit bigger. That's where we're going to pull a few stitches and turn this right side out. And we need to make sure that we have enough fabric that we can press that under and stitch that closed. So looking at these different methods, what do you think your preference will be? Felt and fabric, or get rid of more fabric scraps by doing 2 fabrics and something on the inside to give it shape and body? Let me know in the comments. This is the one I told you was going to be the easiest, and I wasn't lying. This is the outside, this is the inside. So we aren't going to have to flip it, we're not going to have to press it, we're not going to have top stitch. But this fortune cookie is going to have pinking shear edges. So you're just going to cut all the way around, no need to leave any kind of a tab. This would be a really fun project to do with kids, to do with scouting groups. Maybe they're learning to sew or earning a sewing badge. I assume those things still exist. It could be something that they make to give away when they're doing some charitable work. Now I'm going to show you how we're going to turn these. So we sewed all the way around. Previously, I had done a video where I did something circle and I left an opening, and somebody suggested, don't do that. Sew all the way around and then just pull stitches. So I was like, well, that's a novel idea. Let's give it a try. And I have to say I like it. So I just pull a couple stitches and then I get my seam ripper in there. And I love this thing. Look how it just sits on my finger. I know I talk about it every time I use it, but I still love it. You're just going to push that through. And what she said was, now you kind of have a guideline when you're going to be turning it in where the stitches were. It kind of affects the fabric. So if you need to pull it a little further than your tab, you can, but you want to try and make your tab about the amount of space to get this turned right side out. And then I just run my finger right along that edge and see how nice and curved that is, because we did the small stitches and we did the pinking shear clips, so that that fabric is able to lay into that curve so nicely. Now I've heated up my Cricut mini press. And we're gonna get this done. So I kind of push that down so that the edges are good. And now we just have to deal with this section. And I usually do it one side at a time and get it as curved as possible. So I press that top part and then I'm pressing around the seam. Now I'm going to tuck this tab under, and I don't know if you saw how I crimped that a little bit, kind of folded it a little bit so that it would make a better curve. Okay, so I'm gonna press that. Oh, it's hot. You can even see the color difference, how hot it is. So this is a good time to grab a quilter's clapper or a tailor's clapper, and it absorbs that heat. So now the heat's here and not on my fingers. Now this will be top stitched. So now we're going to do that for the rest of the fortune cookies. You can leave white in your machine and then the stitching will really show when you top stitch around here. Or you can change your threads. So I've decided to go with red on the top and pink on the bottom. I am going to do my little pull the bobbin through the fabric trick. So if you don't know this already, put your foot down, hold this thread, put your needle down, and then give it a little pull, and that will pull that bobbin thread up top. Then if you take both of these threads, pull them away, and when you start to sew, neither of them are going to get dragged down underneath to make what I like to call a bird's nest. And then just either knot or go forward and back a little bit, and then we're going to top stitch all the way around. And again, you want to top stitch with a pretty small stitch so that it gives you a nice curve. All right, back to our pressing mat. We have all of our circles sewn. So here's the goal. We're going to be folding them in half with the inside of the fortune cookie showing. So right sides together. Then we're going to be marking with a pencil or a pen, or I will of course be using my trusty heat erasable pen for exactly where we want that line to be. Then once that's done, you're done. All you do is you flip this, kind of push out that center so it doesn't look square, and then make it a little bit floppy. Now, question is, how much do you want your fortune cookie to be open? So you'll see these are two different variations. That one isn't open very much, and this one is open quite a bit more. That depends on how far you keep that line from the open edge of the semicircle once we fold it in half. So this one, we started in a whole inch from the edge. This one, I started a ½ inch, so you'll see it makes a big difference. This is also showing you why I'm going to tell you match both the top and the bottom, so the top thread and the bobbin's thread, to your outside fabric, because if it strains and you see these threads, that really pops out and it would be much, much less noticeable if it was red. So now we're going to start with this one that was super easy. There was no turning, no pressing crazy curves. Oh my gosh, so fantastic. So we're going to fold this right side together. Then I'm going to line the flat edge up on my grid. I can also use my ruler. It's 4 3/4 inches. So you want to draw the line from the center. I want this one to be somewhere in between that ½ inch and that inch. So I'm going to measure down 3/4 of an inch from that outside edge, not from the stitching, the outside edge. And then I'm going to go to within ½ inch of the fold. I'm going to draw a line there. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the rest. So remember, you want the outside of your fortune cookie to be on top. When you fold that down, check the width. This one is 4.5. So because we turned this right side out, so turn it right side out, it's a little bit narrower. So we're going to go at that 2 1/4 mark. And we'll make this one small just so I have a variety to show you. So I did a ½ inch from that edge, a ½ inch from the fold. They look like little tacos. Okay, so this is the bigger one. It should be 6 inches. So we're going to do it at the 3 inch. And let's see what I did with this one. It's not quite open enough, I don't think, to my liking. And it is open 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to start my line 1 inch from that outer edge and go to a ½ inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch from the fold, because this one's bigger. I want both ends to be a little bit bigger. All right, I guess I really didn't need the pressing mat or the Cricut again. But if you wanted to press it, you could. Now, back to the sewing machine. Because the outsides of all of these fortune cookies have red in them, I'm going to be using red thread. And I have pulled up my bobbin thread like I showed you how to do before. And now because there's going to be some strain on this stitching, I'm going to go back and forth 3 times. So I'm just going to sew straight. And instead of going backwards, I'm going to really make sure I start and stop at the same place. So I'm going to lift my foot, turn the whole thing. I'm going to cut that thread so it doesn't get snarled up on top. And then I'm going to stitch to where I started. And then I'm going to do that one more time. Doing it this way is much easier and it's neater because you're going to get your threads better on the same spot in that long distance than if you were to have gone forward and then hit your back button and gone back. I tried it both ways and I really, really prefer lifting and twisting each time. So let's just get these all sewn together. We are in the final stretch. All we need to do is flip our fortune cookies and if you want to, put little fortunes in them. The stitching is here. You're going to put your finger in the center, open that up, and then pull these sides together. So the stitch line's there. And then you're just going to move it until it is sitting the way you want it to sit. And then this is the bigger one, just so you have variety, or this is a great size for money. Now, to put money in there, I just folded I don't know if I'm allowed to have money on video, so I'm gonna make sure you can't copy it. Okay, fold it in half again to make a long strip so it looks like paper. Then you just open this up a little bit, put your fortune or your money in there. I like to have it come out one side and not the other. That looks kind of cute. Or if you want it to be a big surprise, you can just fold it in half again and just tuck it in there. You kind of wrap it around like that, and it will help keep the shape of that fortune cookie as well. So for these little ones, you can write your own fortune cookie, but what I like to do is just this is off just a little memo pad, and I just do little strips about 1 inch wide. Just write whatever you want on there. I love you, Happy New Year. Or how about even like a little gift certificate? So good for ice cream. So that would be a fun way to give a little gift or an outing. So same way, you just kind of open that, wrap it around. I kind of make it flat with the bottom half. Put that back. So that one is a hidden one. And then again, if you don't want it hidden, just let it stick out. So let's review 4 different ways to make them. The quickest way is using fabric and felt and just pinking shears. So you just have to sew, sew, flip. Second quickest way, fabric and felt again, but you're turning it right side out. These two are 2 pieces of fabric. This one has interfacing in it. This one has fusible fleece. That would just totally depend on what you have around that you have little scraps of that will work for this project. And then this one, I did felt. The original one, I also did felt. But you could do any of these methods with that too. So let me know in the comments which way you think you would go, if you're gonna do this, who you're gonna give them to. Give me all the details. All right, enjoy. Make sure you have subscribed to my channel for more fun and quick sewing tutorials, some quilting tutorials, and more. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how easy it is to whip up cute little gift bags for Valentine's Day with a clear heart window that we're going to make out of a page protector. You can use scraps of fabric of any kind of print. You're going to need something to tie it closed. I'm using a little bit of rickrack. You can use ribbon, embroidery floss, whatever you want. The little heart template, and you can get that for free. Just look for the link below. 2 pieces of fabric, 4.5 by 7 inches. And then you can either use pinking shears or a pinking rotary blade. We're going to need some clips, scissors to cut the page protector. Do not use your fabric scissors on that. Then we're going to need some fabric scissors and a little bit of Scotch tape. Let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut the heart out of one of our pieces of fabric. So we're going to fold that in half and just finger press it. We don't want it to stay folded, but we need to be able to cut our heart out. Then I'm going to fold the heart in half as well. I'm going to put the bottom point 1.5 inches up from the bottom, and the fold of the heart is on the fold of the fabric. Now you could pin that on there, but because it is so small, I usually don't, and hearts are forgiving. I just hold it with my thumb, and then you're going to take some fabric scissors and cut around that shape. Okay, now we have a heart cut out.
And you have a heart left over for another project. I'll just put that to the side. Next, we need to work on our clear window. That's what's going to let the person receiving this gift see what's inside, candy or something else. I cut the page protector into about 3-inch strips. You don't have to be super precise because we are going to trim it after it's sewn on there. So it's about a 3-inch square. And you can place it over top of your heart just to make sure it's going all the way over those edges. And if you're going to be making a bunch of these, I would say just cut your page protector into as many of those squares as you can and have them at the ready. Just mass produce. Cut your fabrics, cut your hearts, cut your squares. Next, we are going to place the plastic square right on top of that fabric on the wrong side. This is a solid, so there's really no right or wrong. But if you do have a print, you want to tape the plastic on the wrong side of the fabric. And I usually just put 2 little pieces of tape just to hold that in place. Now we're going to take it to the sewing machine and stitch around the heart opening. I've tried this both ways, and I have found the easiest way to get it sewn pretty well around that heart is to put the plastic on the bottom and the fabric opening on the top. Then you're just going to want to sew pretty close, and I'm just going to sew about 1/8 of an inch from that edge. I'm also going to be using a small stitch length, 1.5, so that we're going to have our best results sewing on that curve. And just go slowly, and if you need to pick your presser foot up and move it to get the curve, then just keep doing that. I want to show you these 2 examples. This is the first one that I did, and I used a contrasting thread, but I didn't like how you could really see that it wasn't as perfectly straight around the edges of that heart. So now I use a coordinating thread, so it isn't as obvious. I'm not going to worry about it not being super precise because, again, this is just a quick gift bag with a window. It's not one that is going to be an heirloom, and I don't think anybody is going to really examine your stitching. If you want to try and be a lot more accurate, you go for it, but I'm going for quick. Now I'm just going to take scissors, not fabric scissors, just regular scissors, and I'm going to trim off some of this plastic. Probably isn't necessary, but I just feel like a little less of that plastic in there is going to make the bag more supple. Now we're going to put these right sides together, and I'm going to have the side with the window on top. I'm going to line it up on the markings of my board, and I'm going to put a little mark, 1/2 inch down from the top. We only want to sew to 1/2 inch from the top since we're going to be using pinking shears to trim the top so that it's super quick. Now I'm just going to put a few clips. So we're going to sew the 2 sides and the bottom, making sure that we start and stop at those marks that we made 1/2 inch from the top. Can you believe it? We are almost done. Now I'm just going to use pinking shears or this pinking rotary cutter and trim all the way around all 4 sides. It's going to prevent large frays like this inside the candy bag, and then it's also going to make the top really cute and finished without having to do a lot of work. So let me show you how each of these works. These are just regular pinking shears, so it's going to give a triangular shape. I'm just going to cut straight across the top. If you haven't seen these before, these are my favorite. They're by Fiskars. They're really easy on your thumb. I think they're called Easy Action Pinking Shears, and I will have a link below the video if you want to get a pair of those. I do use these a lot when I'm clipping corners and other projects. But you can also get a rotary blade that is wavy. And so it does the same basic thing, but it's going to cut more of a wavy shape than the triangular shape, but it is going to prevent fraying. So what I do is I put my ruler down just over that stitch line because I want to make sure I don't slip and cut my stitching. And then just like a regular rotary blade, we're just going to cut, and it's getting a little bit dull to get a new one. So see, it's triangular there and wavy on this side, but the rotary cutter, especially when it's nice and sharp, mine's older, is so fast. You never want to leave all that fuzz on your mat because you don't want it to get into the grooves. That will make your mat last as long. Now we're going to turn it right side out and just try not to crumple the plastic too much. You want to do most of the turning from the fabric side that doesn't have the plastic because it will wrinkle a teeny bit. See, it gets some little bends, but nobody is going to notice it when they're looking through that window at whatever is inside. So let me know in the comments what you would put in a little gift bag like this. I am going to grab these little fun-sized candies. 6 fit in there really nicely. The reason this heart has to be down and not really centered is because you need to have room to pinch this and tie it shut and still have the heart shape, because if it was down too low, it would start to warp the heart window. I cut about 8 inches of rickrack, and I'm just going to tie that. You could just do a single or a double knot. Rickrack doesn't tie in a bow very well. If you want a bow, I would recommend using ribbon of some sort. Then I'm just going to take my scissors, trim those ends a little bit, and voila, it's done. You can do these in 10 minutes or less once you get started. And if you wanted to do a bunch, as I said, you can just mass produce, cut all your fabrics, cut all of your plastic squares, cut your rickrack, and just get sewing. So I hope this is a fun activity or little gift bag for you to make for Valentine's Day. I would love to know who you're going to give these to, how you're going to use them. Or is it going to be for a school party, for coworkers, for kids, grandkids? Let me know in the comments. I love to know how people use different projects that I post. And be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss a thing. If you love projects like this and you'd rather have an ad-free experience and some exclusive content as well, be sure to check out my membership site at sewwithtarareed.com. You can try it for $1 for a week, look around, see if it's for you, and then decide if you want to continue on monthly or with an annual plan. I hope you join me over there. It is lots of fun. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to easily make little tic-tac-toe bags that are drawstring bags with French seams. It sounds a lot more complicated than it is. It's very similar to this drawstring bag. This is one of my most popular videos, and they're super fast because we just used pinking shears so that it wouldn't fray on the sides instead of doing the French seam. The French seam is basically one more step, but for something like a game bag, there's no way it can fray because those raw edges are encapsulated inside. And so I think this is a little bit of a step up in durability from this. So what we're going to need for this is fabric. We're going to cut 2 pieces that are 5 by 7. You're going to want contrasting thread to do your lines. You can either do straight stitch and just make them a little more subtle, or you can use your zigzag or any decorative stitches, however you want to do that. Since I've already made 2 white ones, I'm going to try red and we'll make the grid in white just for something different. Then you need 5 playing pieces in 2 different colors for the game. Now, this is going to be the perfect gift for all kinds of occasions. A cute little Valentine, great stocking stuffer. It could be a little Halloween gift. It could be a birthday party favor. It could be a Hanukkah game, a Hanukkah gift, 4th of July. You could use them for Easter. They would be a lot of fun with candy in them. You know, you see these games like, oh, play tic-tac-toe with M&Ms. But if kids are anything like me, they're going to run out of pieces pretty quickly because they're going to end up in their stomach. So I would recommend doing buttons or something else in addition to candy if you're going to be putting them in an Easter basket or making it a Valentine gift, etc. Then we're going to need the basics: rotary cutter, self-healing mat, ruler. You're going to need some thread. We're going to need 2 pieces, 15 to 20 inches long. I always say a little bit longer is better so you can tie them. We're going to need a safety pin to run that through, and sewing machine and iron. So I think we are ready to get started. So I just took a scrap of red that I had, and I'm going to cut 2 pieces that are 5 inches by 7 inches. Because this is a solid, it doesn't matter what direction I cut it. Now we have our 2 pieces. This is the front and the back of the bag. The back is just going to be plain, so we're going to move that aside. Now we need to line this up and mark where we're going to sew the tic-tac-toe grid. So line it up with the lines on your cutting mat. We're going to go 1 1/4 inches up. So I use my ruler, and it is 5 inches across. So we're going to go 2 inches over from each side. And we're going to make a little mark with pencil or a heat erasable pen on the 4-inch and the 3-inch if you have it lined up on the 1 and the 6, because our grid is going to be 1 inch. So we want to make sure that is right there. Then we're going to measure 2 1/4 up from the bottom. And we're going to line these sides up on the 6 and the 1 inch again. And this is going to be our horizontal line. So we're going to draw from the 5 to the 2 inch. So that will give us our 3 columns 1 inch wide each. Then we're going to go 1 inch up from that line. And we're going to draw that again. We're going to start at the 2 1/4. We're going to go 3 1/4, 4 1/4, 5 1/4. Then we're going to go over 1 inch, and we're going to do the same thing. So now we have our tic-tac-toe grid drawn on there. And it might look like it should be more centered, but you want it down because this is going to be folded and folded to become the casing. You also want to be able to close it with the drawstring and know what's in there. You're not necessarily going to play the game with that drawstring closed, but you want to know what that design is on the outside. So now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to sew those lines. I'm just going to use a white thread and sew on these 4 lines. And I'm going to pull my bobbin thread up for each one. It takes, a couple more seconds, but it makes it so you're not going to have a big old bird's nest on the inside of your bag, because you will see the stitching on the inside of this bag. So I hold these 2 threads tightly while it makes a knot, or while you go forward and back a few stitches, and then just sew to the end. Now, when I did the zigzag version, I did find that my fabric didn't stay quite as flat when I was sewing it, because it was going back and forth and puckering a little bit. So I would recommend either starching your fabric before you do that, so you have a little bit of a firmer surface, or maybe adding a stabilizer or a lightweight interfacing to the back. For doing straight stitches, you can sew right on your fabric as is. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to mark the top part of the fabric that we're going to use for the drawstring, so that we don't sew all the way up. So we're going to mark down 2 inches, just put a little mark that'll be in that seam allowance on either side. Now, because we are doing a French seam, we are going to have wrong sides together the first time we sew around this. It feels weird because whenever you make a bag, you're used to sewing right sides together, but this is how we're going to do it. Flip or pin it in place so that the fabric doesn't shift. Now we are going to sew from this point down here, across and up, starting and stopping at these 2-inch marks, 1/8 of an inch from the edge. I changed my thread to match my fabric. It doesn't really matter for doing the French seam, but I want it to just match when we do the drawstring, so I usually just change it after I have sewn my grid. Now you'll notice I am sewing with the edge of the fabric halfway on this foot. So this is a 1/4 inch foot. So if my fabric goes right along the edge, it's a 1/4 inch. So I want it to be about half of that. So we're sewing quite close to the edge. Now I stopped and I'm going to pick up my foot and I'm going to turn at a 45-degree angle, and I'm going to take 1 stitch. I'm going to take 2, lift it and turn. Having that angle at the corner is going to make the corner turn and have a slightly better point than if we just went straight and pivoted. And you either do 1 or 2 depending on where you stop. Next step, I'm going to trim those corners. I'm going to cut it at that angle, and then just a little bit on either side. It's usually better if you only do 1 angled stitch and not 2, but I hadn't stopped quite far enough down, so we're just going to see what happens. Now we're going to turn it the opposite way. Basically, we're going to turn it inside out. This is the key to making a French seam. You have the raw edges on the right side, with the right side showing. Then you turn it inside out. I'm going to use this cute little flamingo turning tool. Just very gently push those corners, and that gives us a much better corner than normal because I did that angled stitch. Now you're going to want to make sure you take a minute and make sure this seam is on the very edge, because if it isn't pushed out really well and pressed, this next step isn't going to work well, because what we're going to do is we're going to sew a 1/4 inch from this edge. And because our last stitching was 1/8 of an inch, all of those raw edges should be on the opposite side of the stitching. And that is what makes it a French seam, because it encapsulates the raw edges. And as I was working on this, I was wondering, why is this called a French seam? Is it really French? And they believe that it was French tailors and seamstresses that started using this technique a lot in clothing in the 1600s. So it's just always been called a French seam. You don't have to worry about pressing anything above where we sewed. Just make sure you get this pressed really nicely. You can use a tailor's clapper if you want. Now, before we go back to the sewing machine, we want to make sure that where we started and stopped is even, because you don't want one side up here and one side down here. You're going to have an angled drawstring. You want everything to be folding down evenly. So I'm going to fold that down. So I have this lined up, and then I'm just going to check and make sure this folds evenly, and it does. It's about 1/8 of an inch above this solid line. And then let's just check this side. So those are nice and even. So we did a very good job starting and stopping at the lines. Back to the sewing machine. Okay, I sewed down that side and forgot to film it, a 1/4 inch from the edge, starting at the mark. Now, because we're not going to be clipping these corners, they're not going to be perfect points, but we don't want to cut through the stitching that we originally did. So I'm just going to come down and pivot 90 degrees instead of doing the angle. Now, one thing that is a little bit different about doing a French seam in a bag versus French seams on clothing is on the clothing, they might press this and then sew this down. That's kind of where you get that fold and you have the stitching on both sides, and that will make it flat. For something this size, that's going to be pretty impossible. So this is just going to be a little bit of bulk inside the bag, but it is going to make sure we don't have a lot of fraying and that this bag is going to last a good long time for lots of tic-tac-toeing. Now I'm going to turn it right side out. I'm going to go back to the workstation. I'm going to use my turning tool again, and if you don't have one of these, you can use a pencil that isn't sharp, you could use a chopstick, you could use a pen that isn't opened. You just want something that doesn't have a sharp point, but is pointy enough to really help you push that fabric out. But you want to do it really gently and slowly so that you don't end up pushing through the fabric or through the seam and having to start over. All right, so I got those out pretty much as well as I can because we have all that fabric in those corners. And now we are going to press these seams out just like we did the last time. Let me know in the comments what you think you will make these for. There's just so many things we can do with them. Now it is time to prepare our drawstring channels. And by channel, I mean that's where the drawstring is going to go through. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to turn it the opposite way again. We actually could have done that before we ironed. And you're going to take small scissors and you're going to very carefully clip up here the seam just above the stitching so that the part that isn't sewn can move and fold to both sides. You're going to do that on both sides. Now we are going to fold each side in so that it is parallel to the stitch line. So see, we have our stitching here and then it just keeps on going. So we're going to press that. So all four are folded in. Now we are going to open that up and we're going to fold that raw edge in again so that we're going to just sew right down that line and encapsulate that raw edge, kind of like we did with the French seam. So you're going to do that on all four. It's pretty skinny because we didn't want really thick French seams. If you watch the other video for the drawstring bags that were faster because we just did pinking shears, this part was a little bit wider because we did 1/2 inch seams and then did the pinking shears. So we had a 1/2 inch to work with up here, but for this one, we only have a 1/4 inch, but that's okay. It works out no problem. Now you're gonna take this top and you're gonna fold the one side back that is on the bottom so that we don't sew that. And we're going to sew straight down this side and straight down this side. Then we will turn it over and sew the other 4 sides as well. What this is going to do is going to keep those raw edges encapsulated so they are not going to bother us. And it is going to make it easier to get the pin and the drawstring through without messing up the fabric as the bag is opened and closed. You can of course use this method to make any kind of drawstring bag, just a plain drawstring bag, a game drawstring bag like we're doing with this tic-tac-toe, and any size. Now we still have the bag inside out to finish making the channel. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to fold this down so that the raw edge is slightly below where we sewed. I'm going to finger press, well, I guess I can just press that, it's easier. I'm going to use my favorite little piece of wood, my tailor's clapper. The shorter ones are called a quilter's clapper. It's basically the same thing, just a different length. That helps press that and also cool that fabric off. And I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to fold it down so that this top edge matches. I'm more concerned about this matching than where the raw edge is. And then the next step is to turn that raw edge under about a 1/4 inch. The reason I do it after do the bigger fold is so that the bigger fold is consistent because, you know, you might do this side slightly smaller or bigger than the other side, and it's really the top that matters the most. Now I'm going to do the same thing on this side. So I have this one folded back, so we're not going to catch it, and we're just going to sew close to that folded edge on this side. And I did pull my bobbin thread up and knotted that. Now this is the right side, and so using the red thread just makes that really inconspicuous. If you wanted it to show up for whatever reason, you could use a white thread or a different color, but I just wanted it to blend with my fabric. Now I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to fold this side we sewed down, and now we're going to sew this side. See right there, that little spot? Kind of folding out. So what I do is I just take my scissors and I tuck it under, so that it'll get caught in the sewing. And then I'm just going to hold that down so it stays in place while we sew. All the sewing is done. Now we're going to turn it right side out again, and this should be really easy because we already pressed it this direction. If you want to press it again, you can. Now we're done with the iron as well. Now all that is left is putting our strings in. So because this is string and it's two pieces twisted together, I'm going to put a knot in it and put the pin through right by the knot. If you don't knot it, the thread's just going to come apart and it's not going to stay to be threaded through there. Then I'm going to cut about 16 inches. We're going to need two pieces, but I'm going to knot each of them first. Now I'm just going to start on either side, push it through the one side, turn it around, push it through the next side, like that. Take the pin off, and then I usually tie the knot pretty close to the edge because once you pull it, it gets pretty long. So if you have it long to start with, like when this is laying flat, it's gonna be really long. So I try and get it, within an inch. So I tied both of those together in a knot, and then I'm just gonna trim past that knot. So one side is done. Now we're gonna do the same thing, and we're gonna start on this side. This time we're going to start on the opposite side from where the other string started and stopped, because you want to have the strings on both sides, so you pull like that to open and close it. Remember to pull your bag fully open and flat before you tie your strings, because if it was kind of like that and you tied it here, then it would never open all the way. And especially if you're going to play tic-tac-toe on there, you want it to lay flat while you're playing the game. Trim that knot. And it is done. So to close it, you just go like that. Open it, you just pull on the fabric. So all we need are our buttons, which we had at the beginning when we were going over supplies. 5 pink and 5 white, because that will show up well on the red. But now it's really easy. Play tic-tac-toe. So you just want to make sure you have 5 of each color for the game. And then if it's going to be a gift, you might want to add candy or something else in there. It is that simple.
If you haven't guessed, today I'm going to show you how quick and easy it is to make a Heart Quilt Block. If you have never tried quilting or made a quilt block before, this is a great one to start with because it is really simple and it has so many uses. Great, obviously, for Valentine's Day, weddings, romance, anything. You can make quilts. This can be the beginning of any kind of a project that has to do with love. Now, most people think about doing a heart like this, where the heart is red or some kind of print that's red or pink with white or a neutral background. But don't limit yourself. It's also cute if you do it the opposite way, where your neutral color is the heart and then you have something brighter and more fun as the background. I'm going to show you how easy this is to do. You can also download my free PDF that will show you how to make this in different sizes. Let's get started. For today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make a 10-inch, and we're going to make it the opposite way. So we're going to make it the more traditional way, and then you'll be able to see the difference. For any heart, you need 8 pieces of fabric. So you need 2 pieces that are going to be the center of the heart. To create a 10-inch heart, you're going to cut this to 5.5 inches by 10.5 inches. Then you're going to need your background fabrics. You're going to need 2 squares that are 5.5-inch square. And this is going to be for the bottom. And then you're going to need 4 squares that are 2 inches square. And that is going to be for these top corners. We're going to move that aside for a second. And the first thing you're going to do, on the wrong side, there's really not a wrong side white fabric. But say you were using this for the outside, you would draw on this side, the wrong side of the fabric, not the prettiest side. And you're going to draw a diagonal line through all 6 of your squares. And I am using a heat erasable pen. If you've watched many of my videos, you know this is one of my favorite things in the world because it is so easy to see and it is so fun to get rid of because all you do is you hit it with the iron and it disappears. And I'm telling you, every time it happens, I'm like a 5-year-old going, wow, that's so cool. How do they do that? I don't know. I'm just glad that they do. Okay, now that we have all those set up, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to sew the bottom squares onto the rectangles. And you always want to place them both together before you sew, because sometimes if you're chain stitching or daisy chaining, whatever you want to call it, you might pivot this the wrong way. You have to make sure they're going the opposite direction, so it's going to make the bottom of the heart. You don't want to do it like that unless you're planning on making 2 sets. But if you're making 1, we need it to go this way. And a great thing to do when you're doing any kind of a quilt block, if you're laying it out in one place and then moving it to your sewing machine, is to use what they call design boards. And this basically has a little bit of fuzz, so it kind of holds the fabric, and you can lay your quilt block out. It's especially helpful if you're doing blocks where everything isn't layered on top of each other, but I find it a nice way to just like put my things together, carry it like it's a tray of food over to my sewing machine. So let's go and get this sewn. I have my stitch length set pretty small, which I do whenever I'm doing a quilt block. I have it at a length of 2.0. And now I'm just going to sew down this line that we drew on both squares. Now you could daisy chain this like this, but it's a little harder for the sewing machine, especially if you're using a walking foot, to grab it. So for this pattern, I like to start from this side. So I get this side lined up and it's parallel to this one that we just sewed. Now I'm going to make sure I have this lined up perfectly again. You can pin them, but I find if you just really adjust it precisely when you're at your sewing machine, you can have great results. Now we have the two bottom sides sewn on, the two bottom squares, and you're going to take a ruler and you're going to cut 1/4 inch from that stitch line. I do love this ruler from Riley Blake Designs. The blue part is exactly 1/4 inch, so it's really quick and easy to just line the edge of that blue up with the stitching, cut that off, good to go. So the next thing we need to do is we're going to grab the ironing board and we are going to iron that flat. Now the first thing I'm going to do is what is called setting the seam, which basically means we're going to press on the seam as is, just as it's sewn, before we flip it. It's just going to press everything down a little bit more and give us a crisper seam when we go and do it this way. You'll also know, like if you're doing a bunch of these at once, you'll know that you have set the seam, because when you set the seam, the line will disappear. All right, so we set that seam, press the quilter's clapper on there, basically a piece of wood that's really comfortable to hold. It absorbs some of the heat and flattens it. Now we are going to just press these out. And before you take the iron to it, just kind of look at it and make sure that it's going to look like a rectangle. You know, if you don't have it all the way out, you might see a little bit over here. So you want to kind of pre-press it with your fingers to get it as close to that rectangle shape as possible. And you're going to iron over that seam. Grab your quilter's clapper, press down on that. And that one side is done. We've already set this seam, so now we're just going to be pressing it open. Again, looking to make sure this line and this line are looking good. Okay, the bottom half of our heart is done. I'm going to get my design board back. I'm going to put these two halves down. And now we are going to take the smaller pieces and we are going to put them on here to make sure we have them facing the right direction. And there is a diagram if you need to follow that on the free PDF that you can get. You can find the link below this video, but you can also kind of look at it. And when you look at these lines, it makes a heart. So you want to make sure you don't put them both in the same direction or do the opposite directions. But if you happen to do that, that is what seam rippers are for. So now let's head back and we'll sew these four on. Just like with the bigger squares, you can pin them. You can use a little glue stick to glue that down if you want to, or you can just make sure it is lined up perfectly as you go to sew each of these lines. I am going to daisy chain them. See how they're lined up? Kind of the opposite side. That way, the fabrics aren't overlapping each other, so you're not going to get any kind of warping, but you can get this right in there really nicely. Saves a little bit of time and thread. So if you make a heart, what would be your first project? Like, what are you thinking? Let me know in the comments. I would love to know what you plan to do with this type of a quilt block. Just like with the bigger squares, we're going to do the same thing. These top squares, we're going to trim 1/4 inch from that stitch line. All right, we got that stitch. Now we're going to be pressing those out just like we did with these bottom ones. Going to set those seams, get rid of that pen mark. You don't have to use a quilter's clapper. It's just a little extra step that gets it set just that much better, I guess. And it definitely makes it so the fabric isn't as hot when you're touching it. And just like with the bottom ones, kind of finger press this out, make sure it's giving you a nice rectangle shape. Now we just have one step left. And this one I do pin or clip. I'm going to pin this time. So we are going to take these the inside parts, and we're going to line them up, and we're going to pin that together. And we're going to sew down here with a 1/4 inch seam. So as you're lining this up, you're lining up the raw edges. You want to line up where where the point meets. So you get a nice point. And then also be paying attention to this edge too, just to make sure it's all kind of lining up, because they should be two rectangles that fit perfectly on top of each other. Sometimes it's not exactly perfect, but it should be close. It shouldn't be, doing that. So I'm just going to throw 3 pins in that, and then we will sew that seam. Our last step is to press this open so we have our square, but first we're going to set that seam. And then instead of pressing to one side for this center seam, I like to press the seam open. It will reduce the bulk, because if you do it all to one side, it's going to be super bulky at one end. So I just run my fingers along there to kind of finger press and open that up, and then use my iron. Now we have a heart. Isn't that cute? So let's compare it to the negative space one. So here is the 10-inch block that we just made. And here is the 10-inch block where I used white for the heart and the flowers for the outside. So it's kind of a fun play with color. It would be really cute to kind of mix and match these, maybe put some sashing down the middle. I just wanted to make sure you could really see the difference between using the print and the color on the inside versus the outside of the heart.
In today's video, I'm going to show you how to quickly make a mug rug using the 6-inch Heart Quilt Block. I didn't just want this hanging out in my scrap bin. I wanted to put it to use. So let's whip this into a mug rug in no time. We're going to use quilt as you go method, some trim, some fabric scraps. So first off, I want to tell you there's no such thing as mug rug police, okay? You can make this any size that you want. It's basically called a mug rug because it is a rectangle and looks like a rug. If it was a square, we would call it a coaster, which you could turn that into a coaster too, but we're doing mug rugs today. I digress. So I have cut a piece of fusible fleece that is 7.5 inches by 11. You can also use flex foam. You can use batting with a little bit of muslin to give it that stability, any kind of padding for the inside. Then I'm going to take this quilt block. I'm not putting it all the way on the edge or all the way in a corner. I'm going to have it equidistant from the side, because when you do quilt as you go, the part that you're quilting, you want it a little bit bigger, and then we're going to trim it to size. The size is going to be 7 by 10, and then we're going to self-bind this, meaning we're just going to sew it, flip it right side out, and be done, instead of doing more traditional quilt binding on it. I just want something quick, fun, and cute. This would be great for a teacher gift, for your mom, for your bestie, anybody that you just want to say, you know what, I appreciate you. You make my heart smile. We're going to use this. And then I grabbed some other scraps that just kind of went with this fabric. I decided the yellow's a little bit much, so I'm not going to use that. I could do some strips with this, but no, I think I'm going to just keep it simple. I'm going to put red all the way around and on this side. And then I just want to play with some trim, quick and simple. So now let's take this over to the sewing machine and start quilting as we go. And I'll show you what that means. I've pinned the heart block on the fleece where I want it. And now I'm going to just sew a little strip of red over here. So I'm going to take the scrap and I'm going to line the raw edge up with the raw edge of the quilt block, like that. You can pin it or you can just wing it. I'm just going to put 2 little pins in there to make sure that that stays straight. I'm going to turn it and I'm going to just sew with a 1/4 inch seam from that edge. And now I'm going to flip that. So you'll see the raw edge of both of these is right in there. And this is why it is called quilt as you go, because we're just sewing this on directly to the fleece. Now I'm using this little roller thing, can't remember what that's called, to flatten that. And then I'm just going to cut that off even with that. Now I'm just going to stitch about 1/8 of an inch from there to do the quilting. And I'm not knotting at the ends because this is going to be trimmed to size. Now I'm just going to continue adding the red so that I have the fleece completely covered and this heart block surrounded. So I'm going to be lining up the raw edge with the raw edges of the block, because we do want to make sure we are coming in exactly 1/4 inch from the heart quilt block. And then This goes over, you'll see. So I'm going to make sure that this scrap goes farther than the fleece, because again, we're going to trim this at the end. I do love that this, you just kind of wing it and sew and have fun. I'm just going to flip that, and you can either finger press it. I do like this little roller thing. Gets that nice and pressed to then just go back and throw a little quilting in there. I'm going to do the same thing on the top, making sure that this piece is going over the edge of that fleece and a little bit over the edge of this block, but lined up here, both raw edges. So again, you'll see the fleece is a lot smaller than my scraps. I'm just letting them hang over the edge. Doesn't matter at all. I can take these pins out now because that's nice and secure where it is. Now we're going to put our fourth one on, lining up the raw edge of the block with the raw edge of the red. Now, if you have fabric that has a right and wrong side, make sure you're putting right sides together. This is really easy and mindless if you're using solid colors. Design-wise, using odd numbers usually looks really good. Your eye isn't always sure why, but it's the truth. So I think I'm going to do white, pink, and white. I don't know, it looks very Valentine-y. So I'm just going to make it basically as long as that red, because I know it will be longer than what I need. Okay, I did pin that because I do want to make sure it stays straight. I don't want to wing it and have it going all crooked. You could also glue base that down if you want to, but I thought pins were quick and easy. All right, so there's white. Now let's put a pink. I do love doing projects sometimes that you can just literally put together at your sewing machine. You're not moving back and forth from your cutting space to your sewing machine. It's just nice and quick. I'm also eyeballing it. You could use your ruler to make sure they're exactly evenly spaced, but I'm not going to do that this time. All right, now I'm going to do a little bit more quilting on the heart. I think I'm going to stitch about a 1/4 inch around the inside of the heart, as much or as little as you want to do. The next step is to trim our quilted mug rug top to match the back. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trim it to the size of the backing. So I know what I'm starting with. Just get the extra scraps trimmed off of there, because we want to make sure we get this trimmed straight so that our mug rug doesn't look crooked and cattywampus. It's a fun word, isn't it? Cattywampus. So that looks good. Remember, that's going to be like that. So you can kind of do this. I tried this one time where I just put it on top and sewed it and then trimmed it, and I found that I didn't put it straight. So some of my lines on the front ended up being a little bit crooked. Not ideal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line this up so I can visually see what's going on here. Get this lined up on my mat. Make sure I have a little more than a 1/4 inch over the rickrack and also over this side. And then I'm going to trim this to the 10 inches wide. Now we need to get it to 7 inches. So we need to trim basically 1/2 inch off. I just like to use that back for visual. You just want to make sure we have at least a 1/4 inch on each side of this heart. I don't want it coming in too close. I want a little bit of red left. Okay, now we're going to do right sides together. We're going to put the back on top of, well, we'll do it this way. So there our walking foot is going on top of this, and we are just going to pin this together. And I'm going to leave this entire edge open for turning. Instead of doing a small spot, I find it turns better with a straighter, less obvious line if I leave one of the short ends open. And because this end is so short with that red, I want to make sure that's sewn really well. So I'm going to leave this end open. So we're going to sew here, here, here. Okay, now I'm going to clip those corners. I'm going to turn it right side out. And then I'm going to take it to the ironing board and press it. And we're going to turn this edge under and press that. I do wish I had done these a little bit closer to the heart, but we're going to make it work. Now I have it pressed and this pressed under, so I'm going to sew all the way around the edge to close that seam, and so you won't really be able to tell. And then I might add a little bit more quilting just to keep it all together, and then it is going to be done. And now it is all done. We have the back, it's self-bound. Is it perfect? No, I would have moved these over a teeny bit, but I still love it. It is ready for my mug. And now I just need a cute treat to put over there and I'm good to go. Or if you want to give it as a gift, you can roll it up, put it in a mug, put some cookies or some candy in there. You can also grab a free tag that explains what it is if you're giving it as a gift. Look for the link below this video to find that. So if you have any little quilt blocks lying around, 6-inch is perfect to make a mug rug. And this one is ready for Valentine's Day.
Hey, this is artist Tara Reed and welcome back to my studio. Today, we are going to take the Heart Quilt Blocks and turn it into a gift bag. I'm going to use the smallest size, the 4-inch block, and turn it into a sweet little gift bag for Valentine's Day. Now, if you haven't made this heart block yet, check the link below in my video, and I have another video tutorial that'll show you how to make this, and you can get the free directions to make it in 5 different sizes. But let's get started turning this little sweetheart into a sweet little gift bag. Let's talk about the supplies we need to make this super cute drawstring quilt bag. First, you're going to need the 4-inch Heart Quilt Block. And if you don't know how to make that, there is a link below in the description. So we need 2 lining pieces, a back, and then a few different strips to make this. Then for this bag, we're going to do an external channel. Let me show you. So this one has a white heart. The one we're going to make is going to have the flowered heart. So it'll be the opposite of this. We're going to do a fabric channel that gives it a little bit different accent, just a different way to do a drawstring bag. So for that, we need 2 pieces of fabric because there is going to be the channel obviously on both sides. Then 2 pieces of whatever you want to use for your drawstring. I used a satin ribbon. Then I just always keep an inexpensive bottle of clear nail polish in my studio to put on the ends of things that are going to fray. Then you need pins or clips, a safety pin that's going to help you get your drawstring through the channel, heat erasable pen, huge fan of those, some rulers, rotary cutter, rotary mat, sewing machine, obviously, ironing board. So let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to assemble the front of the bag that has the heart on it. So you have these 2 pieces, the skinnier one on the bottom and the bigger one on the top, because we need to have room for that channel, a little puffy fun on the top, and make sure that the heart doesn't get scrunched. So the first step is to sew these 2 sides onto the heart block. So I am just going to clip those together. We're going to sew them with a 1/4-inch seam, and then we are going to press the seams away from the heart. Now I sewed these 2 sides to the heart block, and you'll notice my heart block was a little bit short. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a ruler and I'm going to square that up. So it'll be a little bit shorter, but don't you worry, I'm going to show you how to fix this. I'm sure I'm not the first person to have a slightly off block. Next, we are going to clip and sew these 2 pieces on. There's one piece of fabric that's just a piece of fabric, and there's another piece that has multiple seams to go over. I like to have the seams up so that I can make sure they stay in the direction that we press them as we sew. I'm going to stitch and press that, and then we will do the same for the larger piece. Now we have the front of the bag sewn together, and this is a little bit smaller. So you could either wing it, but then you're going to have a really small margin there if you do a seam allowance. So I am just going to take this, line up my 3 pretty good edges, and I'm just going to trim this so that it is straight on this side. Now you might be saying, Tara, now everything else is going to be messed up. Your lining's not going to be right. The back isn't going to be right, but don't you worry. I'm going to show you how to fix that too. All right, so our top is done. So now I'm going to take the back and both of the lining pieces. I'm going to place the front on top of that stack. And you'll see it's a little bit bigger, so I lined up these two edges. And now I'm just going to trim these other three so that everything is the same size. Now that we have everything sized correctly, the next step is to sew our lining pieces together and our outer bag pieces together. So you'll notice that when I put these together to cut, I already put them right sides together so they would be ready to roll. Then I'm going to take the back of the outside and place it on top of the right side of the heart. Now you can pin or clip. Big fan of clips. I find them faster and they never poke me. Do you have a preference? Have you ever tried fabric clips? Or are you a pinner? Let me know in the comments. Let's have a contest. Pins versus clips. When I sew the outside, I will flip it this way just so that I can make sure these all stay in the direction that they are pressed. So I probably should have put the clips the opposite way. You'll notice one side is flat and one side is colored and curved. It still works even if they're upside down. So we're going to sew down across, so both long sides and the bottom of the outside, leaving the top end open. For the lining, we're going to go down both sides and only part way on each side of the bottom. You want to leave about 3 inches open for turning. And I usually just take this heat erasable pen, draw some little lines so that when I'm sewing, I don't forget. But if you do forget and you do the whole thing, that is what seam rippers are for. Once we sew those, we are going to press the seams open as best we can. It is a little tricky to press the bottom seams open, but do the best you can because having them pressed open is going to make doing our box bottoms that much easier. You don't need to cut the corners like you do in many projects because we're making a box bottom and that will get cut off automatically. So we just need to press these seams open. I've pressed most of the seams. On the lining, I pressed it like it was sewn, but it does have that opening. That's going to help me close that properly later. I'm going to just put this piece of fabric down so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so on these box corners, we're going to need this to be flat because we're going to sew across. And you want this seam lined up with this seam. So I have found, I do this different every time. So this has been pressed open and this has been partially pressed open. So to finish it, I'm going to line up these two seams by pulling this out, open the bottom of this seam with my fingers, and then I'm just going to feel and make sure I have these seams lined up. You can take a pin, put it straight through that seam, and then see if it comes out the seam. Nope, not quite. So now I know I just need to scooch that over a little bit so that the pin is going through the seam on both sides. I'm going to hold that flat. I'm going to test one other section. Okay, got it good. Now I'm just going to place that down. I'm going to hit that with some heat. And I've learned that by doing this while we're ironing, it makes making our boxed corners go a lot faster. All right, so we have these sewn together. We have these pressed, so we're ready to do the box bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each of the 4 corners and I'm going to lay it flat. Okay, I'm going to do it like I'm right-handed. I'm going to lay it flat with the point going to the left. Then I'm going to take a ruler and we're going to draw a line 1 inch up the seam. We're just going to go straight across. If you prefer, you can measure 2 inches. You'll see it goes from 3 to 5. So it's 2 inches long and it's 1 inch up. So whichever way you prefer, go for it. Then I'm just going to pin that so it stays flat and we're going to repeat for all 4 corners. And again, this is a heat erasable pen. Some people might freak out that it's a little bit dark. We're going to stitch right on that line, but if for some reason you still feel like it might show, you can just hit it with the iron and it disappears. To me, that is a must-have for everyone who sews. Okay, we have all 4 corners pinned, so now we're just going to sew on that line. Now, if you want to save a little bit of time and thread and you want to daisy chain these, I have found putting them in the opposite direction works the best because then you're not overlapping, you don't have a bunch of nonsense and you're not trying to get across that big gap. It just lines up perfectly and you can really get it in there. Just make sure it's feeding right to that line and keep sewing. Then you just cut the first one off turn it over, and repeat. Okay, well, joke's on me. I have 2 cameras that I use for filming these videos, and I thought both were on, and one was not. So I cut off these corners without it actually filming. So I'm just gonna walk you through it. It's pretty easy. We had all of the box corners sewn on the lines that we drew, and then you're just gonna come back, pretend that's sewn, and you're going to take a ruler and you're going to line it up 1/4 inch from that stitch line. And you're gonna take your rotary cutter and you're gonna cut off those ends. So we cut off all 4 of those box corners. Now we need to sew the top edge. So we need to get these bags right sides together. I like to turn the outer bag right side out, push out those corners, and I put this inside the lining. We just leave that because, again, we want to get these together right sides together. And the reason I put the outer bag into the lining is so once I sew, I already have this ready to go with access to the opening to turn it right side out. So we're going to match these seams, and I like to match both sides of the seams first. Then I just kind of pull it out, and that usually lines those raw edges up quite nicely. But if they're a little bit off, just scooch them with your fingers and get those clipped into place. Now we are going to sew all the way around the top with a 1/4 inch seam. We don't have to leave anything open, so we're going to get a nice stitch line on that top of our bag because we already have the opening to turn in the bottom of the lining because we are super smart like that. If you have a sewing machine where you can remove your accessory tray and get this fed into your machine so that you can stitch on top, do that. That is not the kind of machine I am using. So I have to basically sew on the lining and go around. So I just keep it out of the way this way. Both work. Now we have that top sewn. I'm just gonna grab some scissors and quickly cut off some of these longer threads. You do have to be careful with stray threads in your bag if you have white, because if you have one of these dark red threads floating around, you're gonna see it and it's gonna make you sad. Now we are just going to turn this right side out through the bottom. Now before we press this, you need to close this opening in the bottom. And you can either hand stitch it so that it'll be totally invisible, or if you don't mind a little bump, you can put it on your sewing machine and just stitch straight across. I usually do that, honestly, because it's at the bottom of a bag, really not the part most people are inspecting. So you'll see there's a little bit of a bump there, but you're not going to notice that in the bottom of a bag, especially since I matched the thread. The next thing we need to do is push the lining inside the bag, and then we have to press this top edge. So we want to get it so the seam is out and you're not seeing the outside on the inside and you're not seeing the lining on the outside. So I get it lined up, started, and iron that, and then I just keep adjusting where that seam is as I move it around. And I like to take my time with this step because this is going to be the very top edge of your bag, and having it pressed really well and lined up really well makes a difference to how professional your bag looks. Now, the next thing we need to do is make our channel for our drawstring. So I'm going to grab my 2 pieces of fabric and I'm just going to finger press them in half. So I had the wrong side up. I'm going to finger press. I'm not going to press with the iron because we don't want this crease to stay. It's just a guideline. Now, I often say fold this ends under a 1/4 inch, then blah, blah, blah. But sometimes you then have to adjust it to your bag. I'm going to show you my new secret. Lay my bag flat. You're going to line your drawstring up 1.5 inches down from your top edge. So I'm going to place my ruler a little bit past 1.5 inches, and I'm going to take this, don't worry, heat erasable pen, and it will be under the channel. I'm going to draw a line there. And I'm going to do the same on the back. Now, you want to get your bag so that your seams are on each side. So not twisted, but you want your seam right on the edge because these channels are going to each end at the seam. So now I'm going to lay this on top of the bag. Doesn't really matter where compared to that line. And I'm going to fold it so that line lines up. Now, before I press it, I'm going to move it off because now that I'm thinking about it, I already drew a heat erasable line. And if I did this on top of here, that line would go away. And then I'd have to do it again, which wouldn't be the end of the world, but heck, why do it if you don't have to? Just scoot your fabric a teeny bit. But this way, you're going to have these ends folded over exactly the amount they need to be. So you're not going to have to adjust it later. And I'm going to do one at a time because I want to make sure I put it on the correct side that I made it for. Now you can see where we had finger pressed, right? We have that faint line. You're going to fold the raw edge of the fabric into that line and press. And it's okay if that line disappears now because the other raw edge is just going to be folded to match this first raw edge. I'm going to flip that over and I'm going to pin this on, and then we'll do the second side. So I'm going to line this up just above that line that I drew, because remember we drew it a little bit more than 1.5 inches down. And I'm going to start at that side seam. Just make sure it stays nice and flat and those ends that we just pressed stay under. You don't want to pin it to the back, so make sure you pick it up as you do this. So this way of doing a drawstring basically makes it so that where the drawstring goes is a decorative element of your bag. So we have that one all set up. Now we're going to do the same thing with the second side of the channel. Now, if there's a little bit of a gap when we sew this together, that's totally fine because your drawstring does need to come out and go back in on these ends. So it doesn't have to match absolutely perfectly. And next we are going to sew on both sides about 1/8 inch from that edge to create our drawstring channel. And when you get to where they match, go back and forth twice just to reinforce that section, because that's where your drawstring might put a little bit more pressure. All we have to do is put the drawstring in and then decide what kind of gift is going to go in there. So I'm going to take my 2 ribbons that are 22 inches long each. We're going to do an experiment. This one, I have put the nail polish on ahead of time before putting it through the channel. And this one, I have not. So let's see if it makes a difference. So I'm going to put your pin, and then you're just going to start on one side. Let me know in the comments what kind of material you like to use for drawstrings. Then you're just going to pull that out when you get back to the same side. So pushing that ribbon through without it having any kind of fray check or nail polish made it a bit messed up. Line these up and put a little knot because I want my bag to be able to open all the way before it hits that knot. So I am going to put this nail polish on there. You need to trim any pieces that are kind of flying off like that. Then I'm just going to hit it with this nail polish so that it doesn't keep fraying. And these, I already put the nail polish on and I let it dry. So we're going to now do the same thing, put it all the way around, but you're going to start from the opposite side of the one you did before. Okay, well, I think we have a winner chicken dinner. You definitely want to put fray check or nail polish on before you put it through your drawstring channel. Now I'm just going to knot that side. Look at how cute that is. So let's look at the other one that is the opposite. Super cute set. Which do you like better? Let me know in the comments. And if you make any of these, I would love to see them. I'd love to see what fabrics you pick. These bags are now 9 inches by 7 inches with a 2-inch bottom. Who's ready for the holidays, for hostess gifts? Who is ready for a glass of wine? I got my hair up. I am ready to work. Let's make some wine bags. In today's episode, I'm going to show you a simple way to make reversible wine bags so you can have either side out. No circles. We're going to do box bottoms. We're going to tie it with a bow, and it's going to fit either one of these size wine bottles. I love that they're reversible. You can pick 2 different fabrics. You want to make sure the fabrics coordinate because you will see that inside fabric a little bit when you have it wrapped around your wine bottle. These wine bottle bags are going to have a box bottom, so no circle cutting. It's going to be nice and simple. So let's get started. You're going to need 2 pieces of fabric, 12 inches wide, 16 inches high. If you're using a directional fabric, make sure you're paying attention and that you have the direction going on the 16-inch. And then when you go to sew it together, make sure you're paying attention to which side has the top of your pattern. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to fold this in half, and then you're going to clip or pin, and we're going to sew down one long side and across the bottom. Again, making sure you're paying attention if your fabric is directional, that you leave the top open because nobody wants a wine bag where everything on the fabric is upside down. Now you're just going to press the seams open on the long end of both pieces of fabric. You don't need to go all the way down because we will be trimming off that point. And while you're at your ironing board, take it and fold down the top edge 1/2 inch. And this doesn't have to be super exact. You just want to make sure both halves are pretty consistent. And you're going to press that as well. This way we can get all of our ironing done at once. Now we're going to make our box bottoms, and I love using this 1.5 inch wide Cute Cuts ruler because that is exactly how far from the tip that we are going to mark our sewing line. But first we need to get it all lined up. Now I've made quite a few of these wine bags, and I have created a system that makes it go quickly and evenly. So what you're going to do is you're going to line up this seam line on one of your grid lines of your cutting mat. So you have the seam line up here, and then you have the point where it seamed right there. So we have both of those on that 10-inch mark. Doesn't matter which mark, just put it on a mark. Then you're going to flatten the bottom. So see how it creates that square, and you're going to make sure that that stitch line is lining up here, the stitch line here, to that seam line there. And then also making sure that, that everything just stays straight on that line. Sometimes you need to adjust it because sometimes you'll put it down and it'll be like a little bit wider here and there. And so I have found this is the quickest and easiest way to get this done. And I'm all about getting projects done quickly whenever possible. So now we're going to take our 1.5 inch ruler, or just whatever ruler you have, and you're going to measure 1.5 inches from the tip to where we're going to sew. And then I'm just going to mark this. I'm just using a regular pen because this is going to be totally inside, encapsulated, so you'll never see that pen mark again. Then I'm going to put a little pin in that. Cute little Riley Blake pin, I love it. Now I'm going to grab this without moving it. I'm going to flip it over. I'm going to put that down because we already have that all lined up nicely. And we're going to mark from the other side. Now you're just going to repeat with the other half of your wine bag. Now we're just going to sew along all 4 of those lines. And this is definitely an area where you can daisy chain them, meaning you don't have to take them totally off, just sew one to the other. And if you're doing a lot of wine bags, this really does save you some time and thread. So are wine bags something you'd like to see more of? Would you like to see how to do them with a drawstring inside? A little bit more complicated? Leave me a note in the comments and let me know if that's something that's of interest. Now the next thing you're going to do is you're going to trim 1/4 inch from that line. You can use your rotary cutter, but I'm just going to do this with scissors so I don't have to keep moving my cameras all over my room. Now the next step is to get these wrong sides together. So you're going to take one and turn it right side out. It does not matter at all which one because these wine bags will be reversible. So you don't have to make any decisions yet about which side you want out. Then we're going to put one bag inside the other and we're going to match these seams. You don't really have to worry too much down here. The main thing is to get these seams matched at the top. So the seam line and the fold, and then I'm just going to put a little clip there. And then we're just lining up this top edge. Because this is reversible and because whoever wants a snarl of a knot in their thread, I'm going to be pulling up my bobbin thread. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my foot down, put my needle down, holding this thread, the top thread, and then I'm going to pick the needle up and I'm going to give it a little tug and I'm going to grab that bobbin thread. So now I'm holding on to both the top and the bobbin. And I'm going to put it under that foot, and I'm going to hold on to that, and I'm going to do a little knot. Now we're going to stitch all the way around, and I usually hold on to that thread until I've taken maybe 2 stitches just to make sure it doesn't get sucked back down under by some gremlin in the sewing machine. And now I'm just going to top stitch all the way around. And now that your wine bag is done, you just have to decide which side you want to be on the outside. So let's just flip this. Put that wine in there, and then I just cut a piece of 1-inch ribbon. You can use anything. I'm just going to tie it right there. And now it is ready to go.
Let's make cute little fabric envelopes. They are the perfect size for gift cards, for cute little notes, carry a bunch of credit cards if you don't want to carry a big old wallet, whatever you want. Now, I love doing them where they have the shape of an envelope. You can also make them where it is straight across, which requires a teeny bit less cutting, but I think it's going to be worth it. I'm going to show you how to do it. And then also these stitch lines that really give that envelope feel. So let's first look at the supplies. The way I have designed these mini envelopes, you can make them out of 10-inch fabrics. So if you have 10-inch pre-cuts, you can use 2 of them and you can make 2 envelopes, or you can take 2 pieces of 5 inches by 10-inch fabric to make these. I just thought some of us have these hanging around, so I would make it so that you have something really efficient to use all of this fabric. Next, you're going to need the template, and this is a free template. If you are on my email list, you can go sign up. It'll automatically be emailed to you. If you're not on my email list, you can sign up. You'll need to click a double opt-in confirmation to make sure no one else is signing you up for my email list, and then you will get this. I'm going to be using a lightweight interfacing. I'm a big proponent of using what you have on hand, which is why I am using this featherweight interfacing. You can use whatever you have. You want it to give a little bit of body to your envelope, but you don't want it to be too stiff or too thick. Then you're going to need some pins, a pencil, something to help turn corners. I have this little turning tool. You could use a chopstick. You could use a pencil, whatever you want. I'm going to be using pinking shears to make the stamp. You can close it a few different ways. I'm going to show you how to use the cam snaps because they're fun and I love them. If you don't have them, don't want to get them, you can also just use a little scrap of Velcro to do that closure. You could also do a buttonhole and sew on a button. That's totally up to you. Then you need your basics: ruler, mat, rotary cutter. So let's get started. As I mentioned in the supplies section, you can make 2 envelopes out of 2 10-inch pre-cut pieces of fabric, or you can use scraps of fabric that are each 5 inches wide by 10 inches high. And if you are using directional fabric, you want it to be wide by high, and you need the direction going like this. I'll talk more about direction in a minute. I'm going to show you how to do it with the 10-inch. You'll figure out how to do it with the 5-inch. So you can put your interfacing on the back of either side. I usually put it on whatever fabric I'm going to use for the lining, just because if you don't adhere it perfectly and it gets a little bit wrinkled, you won't see it as much on the inside. But hopefully we're going to do a good job. Now I have this interfacing, and I cut it slightly smaller than 10 inches. Well, you'll see quite a bit smaller than 10 inches, but because this is going to be on the inside, I decided I did not want to run to the store and get more interfacing. I'm just going to piece this together, and no one is ever going to know. So I have put this face down. You can feel the bumps, or sometimes it's shiny, depending on what product you're using. You want that next to the back of your fabric, because that is what is going to fuse or stick to your fabric. You do not want it to fuse to your iron. Then you're going to read the directions on the back of your product. And this one says to cover with a damp cloth. And I can't find my pressing cloth at the moment, so I'm just going to use 2 pieces of white fabric so I can still kind of see where my square is. And it says to dampen it. So this is just a mister bottle with water. They're really handy for ironing. You can get them on Amazon. I have my iron set to wool, and then it says to press down for 10 seconds to fuse this. So we're just going to hold this down and move across the fabric. Now I'm going to lift and press every time I move. I'm not going to slide the iron like I am ironing a shirt, because we don't want that interfacing to slide at all, because it really was close to the edge of the fabric, and I don't want to all of a sudden fuse it to my ironing board mat. So as you can guess, if you're working with fabric scraps, you would have just cut a piece of interfacing that was 5 inches by 10 inches and adhered it to the back of one of your fabrics. Because we're using these 10-inch squares, I just did it all at once. So I'm going to put these together. I'm just cutting them in half, so it really doesn't matter if they're right sides together, because we're going to be moving them again. Grab my ruler, put that 5-inch line right along the edge. Make sure I have that nice and straight. Cut that in half. And now I have fabrics to make 2 envelopes from those 2 pieces. Well, 3, because I did it before 2. The next step is to cut with our template. And if you didn't get the free template, that's totally fine. You can just cut a point on one end, and then you can cut this shape, or you can do straight on the other end. Now, the tricky part, and the part that seems kind of weird, is if you're going to be using a directional fabric, the point needs to be at the bottom of the fabric, not at the top. See, so the direction's going this way, and we're going to put this down here. If it's just a random toss, it doesn't matter at all which end each of the templates goes on, but let me show you why. It is because when this becomes the outside or the lining, it's going to fold up like this and fold down like this to be the flap. So you want to make sure this flower on the flap is right side up and not upside down. So this is right side up, that's right side up, that's going to be upside down, but we're not going to worry about that. We're keeping this simple. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to place this template, and I'm just doing it on the fabric that does not have the interfacing. Grab a ruler, and I'm going to cut those two angles. So the point is cut, and now we need to do the bottom. You can either put it like this and pin it and cut all three of those lines, but what I like to do that's a little bit faster and easier is to fold this in half and just finger press that so it's flat. And then I fold my template in half and I put the fold on the fold and the point matching the bottom of the fabric. And then I'm just going to pin that and cut that by hand. Now, if you do have a cutting machine and you like to use your cutting machine for fabric, like a Cricut or a Scan and Cut Silhouette, there is an SVG file that you can get. It is with the written tutorial that you can get on Etsy, or they are free for anyone that is a member of my Sew with Tara Reid membership program, which you can try for $1. So I will put a link below this video so you can see that. You could jump in, grab this, grab that SVG file, see what else is in there and decide if that is for you. But there we go. Now we have that shape. So you can either cut that shape on a cutting machine or just quickly cut that by hand. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to put these right sides together, and the orientation doesn't matter because the inside is non-directional. And then I'm going to pin this. Now, a lot of people would cut both of them and then pin them together, but I don't, because you're going to have to do a lot of trimming after you sew these together, and it just saves a step. And then if things aren't matching absolutely perfectly because you've hand cut, it is not going to be a problem. I keep the pins pretty far in, so I'm not going to have to take them off as I'm sewing 1/4 inch from each side. Now, one other tip, and this is great if you're teaching somebody to sew, or I actually still do it all the time myself, is when you have these really deep points, I take a ruler and I draw with pencil where that 1/4 inch is. And I love this ruler because this blue line is exactly 1/4 inch. So it is really quick and easy to get that lined up. I get the inside of the blue lined up with the edge of the fabric. And so I just do a few of these lines where I know I'm going to need to pivot. And you could do this before you put the pins in. Might be a little bit easier, but I didn't. I forgot. So you don't have to do it all the way around, just where you're going to be pivoting your needle while you're sewing. This is really, really helpful when you're teaching people to sew, teaching kids to sew. It gives them a lot more confidence to know what they're doing, because even experienced sewists, sometimes when you get to weird points like this, you think you know where you need to turn, you lift your needle, you pivot, and you realize you're a little further than 1/4 inch. And so you have to put it down, go back again, which isn't a huge deal, but it can be a cause of stress for people who are new. So when I was teaching my niece, she really liked doing this when we did a project. So it takes, a minute or two to just draw those lines. And now we're going to take it to the sewing machine and we're going to sew all the way around with 1/4 inch. And we're going to leave a few inches open on the straight side down towards the point, but not too close because we want to be able to turn that nicely. So there and there. So now we're going to head to the sewing machine. Even though my machine will do a knot for me, whenever I am sewing at the beginning or at the end, when I know I'm going to be turning something right side out, I always go forward and backward just so that there's a little bit more stability to that section and it's not going to rip open when I'm turning my project. So now you'll see how easy that was, that I could just stop on that line, lift the foot, pivot or turn my fabric, and then I'm going to put the foot back down so that it is lined up with this edge, and we're going to keep on going. Now we're just going to remove these pins and we're going to trim and cut our corners. So I like to cut my corners nice and deep, especially these, because they are so tight. getting all of this fabric inside this little section is going to make it really hard to turn that corner well. I will say though, that you're not going to get a perfect point, whatever you do. It's going to be a little bit bubbled, but that's okay because it's on the inside. So I clipped those points, and then I'm just going to cut right along where the white fabric is cut. So I'm going to cut that back off, or the lining. Then I'm going to cut those two corners. Now it's also important to trim here so that this is going to turn and give us a nice straight area on the envelope. So what I do is I take my scissors and I cut straight in to each of those pivot points. And then I just cut kind of at an angle on both sides, because that is going to ease up that fabric so that when we turn and press it, it's going to press really nicely. Then we're going to do the same thing up here. I do 2 cuts. Make sure you don't cut your stitching whenever you're cutting corner. So you'll see we had so many cuts to do with the corners that it was just as easy, actually easier and faster, to cut the rest of this lining off now instead of cutting it into the shape. So next we just need to turn this right side out, and you want to get it as right side out as possible with your fingers before you use a turning tool. So I always rub my finger along the seams, just kind of press that out as best I can. These bottom corners obviously are going to need a bit of help. I'm going to grab my turning tool. And again, if you don't have one, you can use the tip of a pen. Make sure the pen isn't open because you don't want to draw on your fabric. You could use a chopstick, something that has a point but isn't super pointy, because you don't want it to poke through, especially since we cut pretty close to those seams. Even if I really jabbed this hard, I could poke this through, which would be a bummer. We'd be starting over. Going to use my quilter's clapper. This is just a piece of wood, really easy to hold. It's unfinished. After you press this down. It takes the heat out of the fabric and also gives you a better crease than if you don't use one. I also love it because when you're steaming cotton, especially when you're on a smaller ironing board like this that is metal, this fabric gets really hot. So I like to do this not only for how well it helps press that, but it also makes it less hot for my fingers. Then here where we turned it, you just want to have that tucked under with the same seam allowance. So when we're done, nobody's going to know which side you turned. I'm going to use this for the outside, this for the inside. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this down and press that flap. Now you'll notice on the template, it has a line. So you can use that. You're just going to kind of put this up a little bit, like with the seam allowance, right? Because it's still a little bit wider. So you can do it this way. Put your ruler here, move that. You want it about a 1/2 inch down. And then you can fold that, move your ruler, do not iron on an acrylic ruler, and press. Or I was doing that on a different video and somebody told me about this cool product, because we all learn about things at different times, right? So she told me about the Clover hot ruler, and you can iron right on it. So what I do is I put this down and I make sure this line is even on the edges. This point is at that 1/2 inch. And then I can leave this here. I can press on there and do that. It's really cool. I like it for projects like this, but it's really, really handy for bigger projects where maybe you're doing a long strip of fabric and you need it folded down a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch. It's a fun little tool to have in your arsenal. So I just wanted to share that with you. Now we're going to unfold that, and you can see that crease. We're just going to fold this up and put these points to the crease and press. So now we have our shape, and if you just wanted it to be plain and you didn't want a stamp or an address or anything on the back, you would be good to go to sew this together. But we're going to do the whole shebang, so I'm going to show you how to do the stamp and the address piece next. We'll use this as an example. So for the stamp, I cut a 1-inch piece out of fabric, and I usually try and have something that I like in the center. This was cut out of this bottom section, so this is going to work really well. I'm just going to take that and I'm going to fussy cut it, which basically means I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to line that sunflower up inside a 1-inch square. And it's a little bit bigger than 1 inch, so I can either cut some of the petals off on either side, or I could off-center it like that and be artsy. I'm just going to kind of make it the whole center. So I'm just going to turn it and cut all 4 sides, making sure I'm lining it up so that it's going to be about a 1-inch square when we're done. So this is going to be the center of my stamp. So if you have white, I would use a color instead of white for this outer stamp section. So just go into your scrap fabrics. I happen to have the same fabric, and you're going to want a piece that is, or at least a 1/4 inch larger than your stamp all the way around. I'm just going to cut this really quickly and make it an odd shape and show you how it really doesn't matter, because when we make it into a stamp, it's going to be perfect. So we're going to sew that onto that. But before we do that, we're going to get our dress section ready. And I'm going to use this yellow again. So I'll have this stamp. Oh, it's going to be interesting. I've never done this in color. So I like to make this 1 inch high and about 2.5 inches long. So this is 2 1/4. That's just what it is. So that's going to be totally fine. So that stamp will be up there. This will be here. Now, there's a couple ways to do this. You can do it with stitching, and I'm going to show you that. Or another way is to use heat transfer vinyl if you have a cutting machine. And that's how I did this. So you would basically take your Cricut, Scan and Cut, Silhouette, whatever you have. You could do a name. You could say for you, whatever you want to do. You would iron that onto that piece of fabric and then sew that onto the envelope. So that's an option, but I'm going to show you the sewing method. So because I want this to be jiggly lines, I actually don't want that on the inside of the envelope. So I am going to sew that before I put it onto the envelope. It's a little harder because this is just one piece of fabric. It's so flexible. So you could either starch that to make it a little bit stiffer, or I am just going to put a little scrap of interfacing on the back to give it a little bit of body and help it to hold its shape while we stitch. Okay, so now we are going to go to the sewing machine. Now I'm just going to quickly sew all 4 sides of this little sunflower stamp image to the gold backing. And I am using a smaller stitch length. I'm using a 1.9, and I'm going to not go all the way to the edge. And the reason I'm using a smaller stitch length is I want to be able to fray that edge because I think it just gives a little fun look to my stamp. So you want to try and be a little more equal distant from the edge. This one is a little bit higher than the rest, but we're just going to wing it. And then I'm just going to take tweezers and I'm just going to pull some of these threads out. And you can do it all the way around. Primitive little frayed look to it. And then it looks purposeful and not like a couple threads are coming out if you don't do it. See, it gives kind of a fun look. And then we'll cut the yellow in a minute. But first, we are going to just sew our address onto our label. And I usually just do 2. You always want to do a contrasting color fabric. If I did black, it would show up a lot more, but I'm just going to do white and see how that looks. And again, I'm using a small stitch length so that we can curve this a little bit more in this short distance. But before we sew these down, we need to trim our stamp. And I'm just going to do that right here so it's easy. So I keep little bowls by my sewing machine for threads. So I'm going to put that down so that I don't end up getting a bunch of little threads into my sewing machine since I've decided to do this right here. So I'm just going to take the pinking shears and I'm going to cut all 4 sides so that it really looks like a stamp and not just a square on a square. So there's our stamp. I do have links to all of the products below the video if there's anything that you decide, oh, I like that and I want that. So now I'm just going to place this stamp and I'm going to sew this on. Now, this time I am going to pull up the bobbin thread, which means I'm going to put the needle down while holding this thread, lift the needle, give a little tug, grab my tweezers. And I always use tweezers because if I use my fingers, I end up stabbing my finger a lot with that sharp needle. Put both threads under the foot and then I'm going to hold that as I start. That is going to avoid having one of those little bird nest knots created underneath your fabric. Now I'm going to place the address. So I'm just going to do the same thing, sew that on there. The next thing we need to do is draw the lines that we are going to sew to make it look like paper folded for an envelope. And you can do this a couple ways. You can use a pencil, you can use a heat erasable pen, you could even just put a little piece of tape as a guideline. I'm going to throw caution to the wind and I'm going to use one of these Frixion pens. They are supposedly not designed for fabric, even though they will go away with heat, but they might come back if the fabric gets too cold. I used them a lot for a while, then I learned that little fact. My Madame Sew dried up and I don't have a replacement, so we are going to throw caution to the wind because it's an envelope, for goodness sake. I don't think it's an heirloom thing that's going to be sticking around so long. So I have drawn the lines on those. Now, before I have always done colored outside. So I've always used white so that it shows up really nicely, like on this one. But because we're doing a white outside, I'm going to change my thread and I'm going to do gold because I want it to show up. So I'm just going to do a contrasting color to my fabric. Now I'm going to sew the paper line. I'm going to raise the bobbin thread and grab a hold of that so there won't be a big knot underneath because that will be inside my envelope. Then you just want to trim off those threads. And now we're going to sew the envelope closed. If you do Velcro, you need to put the Velcro on before you sew the pocket together because it's really hard to sew that on when this is already together. But because Velcro is so flat, you can sew all the way around once the Velcro is on. So I'll just walk you through how you would do Velcro if that is your choice. Okay, so if we were going to do Velcro, you would sew the soft, or hook and loop, you would sew the soft side on the inside of the flap. Then you would fold this up, you would put this down, fold it up like this to figure out exactly where the other side of the Velcro needs to go so that those two are going to match. Then you would open this back up and sew that on. That's if you're going to do Velcro. Then you would sew it all together. But I want to do a snap because they're super cute. So I am going to sew this together and then we're going to do the snap. I'm going to show you that that can work. And because this is folded, it's basically 4 layers of fabric when you get those seam allowances in there. You can see that my presser foot is really tilted. It's tilting up and flat on the back. To make it more even and move better when it gets started, I'm going to use leader fabrics. This is basically pieces of folded up fabric. Now just squeeze these fabrics back under and put the presser foot down. Now the presser foot is flat and the feet have more to grab onto to get started. It just makes for smoother sewing. You don't have to do it. It's just something I wanted to share with you. So I'm just going to sew all the way around about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. And doing this sewing is not only going to be sewing the pocket, but it is also going to sew this area shut where we turned this right side out. To finish this envelope up, we're going to add a snap to close it. And as I've mentioned before, these are called cam snaps. They are plastic snaps. They come in all kinds of colors, made in the USA, family-owned business. I love them. Haven't met the people, but I love the product and I love that it's a US-based company. I have a lot of different colors which are the circles, just like this. So it's just a circle snap. They also make cute little hearts and stars, and I don't know if they have any other shapes, but for this one, I'm just going to do a dot because I don't know. I liked the heart on the pink for Valentine's Day, but we're going to do a circle on this one, and I chose to use the gold. So what you need are 2 of these pointy pieces, and then you need female part is the innie, and the male part is the outie. You can think of it as a belly button. A 1/2 inch down from this point so that your snap is centered. But I want to show you how to really figure that out instead of just measuring, because sometimes maybe you stitched a little further from the edge. The main thing is you don't want this circle to be on this seam allowance where it's a little bit thicker. So you want to kind of feel in your fabric for how far up it needs to be so that it's going to be nice and flat and not tilted. So I'm going to say right there, which is a little bit more than that 1/2 inch. Not much, but a teeny bit. So I just put that there. And then put the awl, which is like an ice pick for fabric. Be very careful. It just pokes a hole in there. Then you're going to put the circle side with the point through the fabric on the outside. You're going to just use your fingers and push down. Make sure the fabric is down. And then you're going to take the female side, or the outie belly button side, and put that on top. Now you're going to grab the press to put these on. The circular part is going to sit right in the divot of this black area. And then the outie or innie is going to sit on this white plastic part. So you're going to get that in there. And then I always just kind of turn it and investigate and make sure it's centered in there before I squeeze. Now, when I squeeze, what is happening is this is flattening the plastic point inside this piece so that that piece is connected and going to stay on there. So that's great. We have the outside. Now, how do we decide where to put this one? It's very simple. You take the snap, you fold it down, and you press. See how that leaves a circular mark right there? rowdy snap part leaves a mark. You're going to take the awl and you're going to poke a hole in the center of that circle, being really careful just to go a little bit in. Don't go through the front of your envelope. Make your hole. This time you're going to take the circle piece and you're going to go from the inside of the envelope, put it in there, press it down, put the other half on, and you're just going to repeat the process with this press to secure this half of the snap. And that is it. It's done. Look at how cute. So here are some examples. This one I just did a stamp. I didn't do the address part. This one I used my Cricut and used heat transfer vinyl. This one has a Velcro close and it has a sewn address kind of like this one, and the stamp. You can definitely see that more because I used a darker thread than on this one. You just experiment as you go. And now these are ready to use. And remember, you can get the free template by signing up for my email, and that gives you the shape to cut here and this top point. If you're already on my email list, just fill out the form from the link and it'll get sent right to you. If you've never opted in before, you'll have an opt-in email and then you will get it sent right to you. If you are a member of my Sew with Tara Reid membership club, you can find the written directions, which includes the template, already in the membership at no extra charge. So what did you think? Are you going to make a heart quilt block? You can make them in 5 sizes if you didn't watch that part. Or what are you going to sew up for Valentine's Day? Let me know in the comments. I would love to hear. And I hope you have subscribed to my channel so that you will not miss a project. I would also like to invite you to try out my new membership at sewwithtarareid.com. In there, I have tutorials, written videos, techniques, resources, some fun things, and it's completely ad-free. So you can try it for $1 if you go to sewwithtarareid.com/$trial. There's a link for that below as well. So happy Valentine's Day and happy sewing.